So, sorry, it gets a strange voice command when you enable the recording now. I guess that's just to remind you. So for the flow chart, I still want you guys to think about it in terms of a flow chart, because that makes it a little bit easier to see the branching aspect of dialogue trees, right? Like, are you going to choose the good guys, the bad guys, or, the military or the villagers, that kind of thing. Let me do a screen share. Some stuff. All right, so I'll put this in chat as well. So I like this one. There are other options online. And let me pull up some examples of ones that worked well last year. Yeah, Draw.io. It's another easy one. Steve was the one that suggested Twine, but then I asked him and after the fact, and he was like, "Oh no, they don't know how to use Twine." So I was like, "Well, now we gotta learn how to use Twine." So we'll wait on that one. Oh, this is a good one. Okay. So here you can see some decisions that you can make, right? Like, you end up with a strange woman who promised you adventure. She guides you towards the catacombs and tells you to bring nothing but the chest. It's like, do you leave her on the ship or take her with you, right? It's a nice, easy, just breaking point. Like, are you going to take the NPC along or do you trust them on the ship, right? So different branching options here are what I want you to think about, right? Theirs is a bit morose in that a lot of people, just a lot of endings, just like kind of immediate deaths, right? Typically you want to have some sort of like, she turns on you and then you fight her, like make it, gamify it so that it's more gamey rather than just having these like dead ends where it's like, you trusted the wrong person, therefore everybody dies. Like, well, if Mass Effect was like that, right, it wouldn't be the game that it is today, right? The interesting part is like, yeah, you took the wrong choice, right? But then you just have to do more work to get back onto the main story path. Whereas, you take the right choice or you build up your resources before the fact, and then it's easy to make the right decision, right? Which is just the one that you've already prepared for and thought about. And that gets you back onto the main story path a little bit quicker, right? So look for opportunities where you might have like, other levels or extra fights, or you have to go and get an item that like maybe you hadn't thought about before. Not necessarily like backtracking, right? Nobody is really a fan of backtracking. Let's see if we can find another good one. Got some. So this one looks like it's also an IO one. So here's another flow chart, right? This one might be that draw.io, kind of looks like that, right? It's a little more simplified, a little more gamey, right? Like, are you gonna hunt? Are you going to get something from the shop, right? So are you like going to grind for gear, or are you gonna pay 30 coins to like bypass that quest, right? You can choose to do things like that in your flow chart, right? To kind of break it up. So I still want you to think of it in terms of a flow chart that would be best for everybody, just to have that bit of practice. Here's some really nice ones that were done as well that have like, you know, this old-timey map feel to them, just to give it a little bit of extra punch, you know, and get you into the zone. So if you're doing like, you know, a sci-fi one, maybe you want to have it be on like a sci-fi PDA or something, and you don't necessarily have to make everything from scratch. You could go and pull concept art or reference images for that sort of thing. Let's put a lot of work into theirs. Oh, here's a nice one. This one starts at the bottom though, which is, I wouldn't think of it as backwards. I think everyone else started at the top, but still this one is nice, right? But straightforward. It just breaks up their story, you know, their kind of world backstory, or where the hero is at that point in the world backstory. And then you start to like, okay, what if I'm in their shoes? Like, what am I doing next, right? Like, okay, I'm going to leave the kingdom to go on a quest. Like, do I go to the choices here? Like, you leave a person who has been cursed into being a half goat, right? And then it's like, okay, are you going to save that person, or are they out of the picture forever, right? And so you could have this kind of structure where it branches completely, right? And then because you've decided to save one NPC, like it's unlocked one story path line, and then, you know, the other one is forever locked off to you. But generally what you see in these story-driven games, or these choice-based games, right, is that there's kind of like these points here, and it does that here too, where it kind of like lets you make a decision, but then it brings you back around onto the main quest path again. Yeah. So hopefully that gives you guys some idea, you know, of the complexity for these things. They're just like a few words or a sentence per point on the flowchart, right? And as I mentioned, I like this one because, again, it's very easy to just go here. You just get started right off the bat and start to join things up and be like, okay, this is what happens, and start, you know, if you've written your lore and your backstory and that kind of thing, like you can just start wherever you like on the story as it is already. Yeah. No, it doesn't have to be the whole plot. It's just one. It can be like a little fetch quest, or it could be, I think we're going to do a new one for the final. What I'd like to do for the final that I think would be useful for you guys, we didn't do this last year, was to do a dialogue system inside of Unity. But I need to dig into that a little bit more, because it's not something that that we've done before. So I feel like some of you guys might want to do something like that for your AGP, right? This is all just like, let's try something out that's might be useful for AGP projects in the future. And you guys know me, I like these quick wins, right? I like to be able to jump in, work on something for an hour, and then just have it ready to go, right? And that introduces a whole nother little segment of my game that makes it higher quality than it was the hour before. So yeah, just one mission is fine for this time, and then we might come back and look at the diagram again for the final. All right, so what else did I tell you guys we would look at? I thought I put it in announcements. Did I put it in level design? Okay, level design. Oh, Unity capture, animated obstacles, and pause menu. Anyone have a preference for what people who are here are worried about getting done? Because having a video capture for your game is still a requirement on the BLE. So if no input, I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I was just messing around with my terrain to test out some of the problems with people were having. All right, I've also like boosted the speed on my track so that now like everything goes super faster than it used to. And my boost button is like adding like 10,000 horsepower or something insane. And so I made some modifications on the AI car as well to like speed up the overall the race, right? So it's a little more twitchy and a little more dangerous if you're making like collisions or mistakes and things. Like it can really mess everybody up. Like, well, let's say that I want to record this, right? You can just use a third-party capture if you want. But the nice thing about Unity is all of the different plugins that we have. So we can just go to the package manager and use LazyCam. Oh, like this is just a Cinemachine camera. Is that what you mean? The camera that's not super locked onto the back of the car? Or is LazyCam a capture software? Okay, yeah, I can show you guys that at the end. So if you go into the package manager, I'm in the Unity registry list, right? And down here I have the Unity recorder. Let's just install this or download and install it if you haven't used it before, right? And this will give you a capture system right inside of the engine. And there are advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is that it's going to capture every frame. So you're going to get nice and buttery smooth 1080p video as your result, right? That's not going to get choppy. The disadvantage is that your input can get choppy, right? So that if your game is Twitch-based or difficult, if you make a mistake, there's probably going to be some input lag. So we'll test that out now and see if it becomes an issue. Once we have it installed, it should be in here somewhere. So it's under General, Recorder, and then go to the Recorder window. Brings up this window, right? And then you can see that it will give you some options here. I guess we can just do add a recorder. Maybe change that part a little bit. These parts are fine. It looks like it's going to put it into, not into our assets folder, but into the folder above that. We can choose what FPS we're going to get. 30 is fine because it's going to capture every frame, right? And then H.264 MP4 is our output format, which is good. Output resolution, right? Full HD. We can force this, but my window size should also be set to that. So sometimes you don't necessarily have to worry about that part. And then it's going to just keep creating new files each time that you start it. Cool. So start the recording for all active recorders. So it automatically activates the play mode first if it's not activated yet, right? So if I hit play on here, it's going to start play mode and it's going to start my recording. So if I do a little fancy dance, whatever I have for play time here, or you can see that I increased the downforce on the car, so it's affected the jump physics as well. Then it should quit out after play mode is done. Yep, and it has increased the take number. So it's going to put my stuff in here. Let's just see where it is. And it spits out a recorded movie. And it's got my UI elements, right? It's got a little bit of artifacting going on in the compression, but for us that's a good thing because this movie's only 13 megs, right? And if it's 1080p, it's not true 1080p, right? It's not pixel perfect necessarily, but it is nice because that's smaller than the Discord maximum file size, right? So you can actually use this to post problems and things if you're running into an issue in game. I like it as a grader, right? Because it puts everyone on an even platform, and I don't necessarily have to get good at your game. It's not as difficult with a racing game unless you've got like a really narrow Rainbow Road style track, right? But generally, for all my classes, I grade the build, right? I'm not grading your project. I do look at the project if I suspect things have been copy pasted from other places, or if there are problems sometimes, and I can try to fix it. But generally, the final product, right, that would go onto store shelves or go onto this app store, that's what's going to be graded. Yeah. So it does go into my project folder by default, though. So keep that in mind. If you are transporting your project folder around, right, you've got all these recordings, it could get bloated. All right, since you asked about the camera, let's look at that. So I have just replaced the main camera in my scene, or just added a Cinemachine brain to my main camera, and then added a virtual camera, right, as a replacement for the main camera. So remember, a VCam is not actually a camera, right? There's no camera object in here. These are just settings that are being imposed onto the main camera, and the main camera is just snapping to wherever the virtual camera is in space, right? And whatever settings I have on that are going to be carried over to the main camera. So including things like priority. Virtual camera gives you some options here at the top as to what it should be following and what it should be looking at. So this produces that lazy effect like you're talking about, Jamie, where there's a bit of a delay, right, in how fast it's going to catch up to your car. And there's a bit of sway in how fast it turns with the car, right? So when it's locked onto the car, it's very rigid. You feel like every single bump. And I actually added this on because with a regular old camera, it was getting too bumpy with this high level of downforce that I'm using for some reason. I guess it messes with the suspension. And there you can see the bumpiness starts to kick in, and it starts to like feel uncomfortable to play, right? Like I don't want this like go when I'm on a flat surface. So once I had that, I was really just playing with these settings until I found the stuff that worked. I don't know all these settings off by heart because I haven't done a ton of live experimentation with the VCam stuff. Normally when I'm using virtual cameras, it's in the cinematic side of things, right? But here you can see that little yellow dot is kind of related to, I believe it's called the look ahead time, right? So like there are things that you can change in here that will change how tight the follow is. The big one that I noticed though, I think it's this dead zone. Yeah, so this dead zone that creates like a wider area on your camera, right? That creates a really weird sensation where there's like this whole area in the map where the camera's not gonna turn at all. So this could be useful for a, you call it an infinite runner, endless runner, right? Where if you're in like Temple Run, you're pretty much going down a straight track and then you make a hard turn and then it's straight again. So it can kind of catch up. But I did find that it felt a lot better to just turn off, I guess, was it soft zone and dead zone that I was playing with? Oh, I'm off into a bin. Let's see here. Anything else in chat that came to mind for anyone? So yeah, for Cinemachine cameras, I recommend you just start messing with some of these sliders. It's a nice thing about sliders is that you can just test them out and see what they do, right? Rather than having to program anything or play with values in a script. Okay, say animated obstacles was one that I thought would be handy just because I have obstacles as a requirement. I kept that wide open because I wasn't sure if we would be able to catch it, like cover it in class. And really, you know, any old 3D object can be an obstacle as long as you have a collider on it. So, you know, when I was making these, I literally just went to 3D object and I created a cylinder. It comes with a collider on it, so it will react to the rigid body collider on the car. And then, you know, just combining a couple objects together, you can start to make something, and then smushing them together into the hierarchy. And then lastly, I gave them like an empty game object as a parent. One thing I forgot to show you guys that hopefully you've run into before in what I'm gonna call it, in 2D game design is how to create a prefab of an object. So typically when you make something like this and you're happy with it and it works, right? You've tested it, you know that it's gonna perform how you expect, and maybe you've already got like texture on there. You want to have that object easily placeable in the future, right? So all I need to do is drag it from the hierarchy into the assets folder section. And this has now become a prefab that I can edit in a separate window if I wanted to edit something about it, right? Say, I want to change this so that all the other pieces don't also have colliders on them, only the main body of it has a collider, right? So I can get in here, remove these components. That should propagate down, yeah, and you can see it did. So any of those objects that are in the scene now, if I have edited the prefab, that will be propagated to every single other object, right? So say I have my obstacle here. Let's say if I wanted to make it a different color. Oops. Oh. Right, so I have this obstacle. I can go to edit it, find where the material is, just drag the material on it. I go back to the scene. Now that object has been changed, and every single version of it in the scene has also been changed, right? So you can do the same thing with, say, the AI car, right? Say if you make some settings on the AI car, like mine, where I've like increased the amount of power that it has and the downforce, right? I could just delete all the other ones and then make a copy of this one. Another way to do it would just be to drag this one from the scene, call it a prefab variant, right? And then if I make any changes to it, any other AI car that I use this prefab for will also inherit all of those settings. Francesca, yes, you can make stuff out of Maya, but I want at least one where you've sculpted the terrain, right? So you can have one baby track that's just a loop, right? That was our in-class track. I still want you to experiment with the terrain a little bit so that you can get a feel for that tool. If you want to go ahead and start to make stuff in Maya for your level, all the more power to you, because that's what we're going to be doing the second half of the term. So it would be good to start to test some of those things. But for this project, I'm not too worried about graphics and the look of it and stuff. I want you guys, and I mean for the next project too, for the most part, you know, if you want to make a ramp, right, for your car, you can just use a plane you can go find a texture for it later, once you're polishing stuff up. But I don't mind if you're just using the super basic built-in Unity stuff for for obstacles or for terrain, for additional gameplay stuff. Yeah. Another thing that I did in here that some of you guys might find interesting is that these textures that I've assigned to my terrain are actually from Substance Painter. So what I did is I opened up Substance. I made just a regular plain object, like a flat square. I think it's in the sample scenes inside of Substance. Oh, didn't shut down correctly. I threw a texture on there, like a material on there from Substance. I exported it for Unity, and then I had nicer textures, right, than just the basic terrain one. So if you've got a big material library, and it comes with a decent amount by default, right? But if you have a nice big texture library in your Substance Painter that you now want to try out, I think it was this tiling material. This is just one of the sample projects, right? It's got some layers over here that we don't particularly need. So if I want to bring in a texture from Substance into Unity, right? In this case, it is like ramping up the height map shader to the extremes. I can turn that off, just clicking height on the material, right? Let's say that I really want some sort of material that I've discovered in Substance or even on the web, right? You can export this, send it back to your assets folder. I've got a materials folder, and then I also made some subfolders for that. So I'll call this. Try to avoid using pink in your Unity scenes because everyone knows that that's like the texture missing color, right? So it kind of like pulls you out of the game, and it's like, why is the texture broken? But just for example, right, I can set the path inside of the export. I tell it I'm going to export it for standard metallic, I believe is the default Unity texture. Let's grab the material. Metallic, right? It's lagging a little bit. So I tell it that it's for Unity 5, standard metallic shader. Gives me a preview of the different textures, the files that it's going to pop out, right? Tells me there again. I can choose if I want it 2048 or 1024. 2K is fine. Hit export. And then inside of Unity, it'll read those. It will drop in those textures, and then to assign it on the terrain, I go through the same process as we went through in class. We go to the paint terrain, paint texture, edit terrain layers, create layer, and then scroll down to look for that plane divided. Unfortunately, they're all under the same project name, which is my bad. Clicking on that texture lets me see it. And then if I want to assign the normal map as well, right, I have the normal map, drag it in there. Does it come with a roughness mask? Mask map. So it actually isn't a standard material, right? It's a different type. Terrain layer. So it has a diffuse, a normal, and a mask map, specular map. It also has channel remapping, specular. Can I drag a metallic in there? Doesn't like that. Cool. But then once I've got it in here, right, I can go back and select the terrain again, paint texture. And now I have this new pink texture, right, that I can use as a paintbrush. Now, I don't think I made that a rule that you can't use outside assets for this project. I might have left that as a bit of a gray area, like the story design. Let me check in my level design. But for the final, I'm going to want you guys to make everything. Oh, was I looking at last year's 3D level design? Unity terrain, AI, and obstacles. So I did not specify that you can't use outside assets for this project. I just didn't want you guys to go and like grab those Unity roads and stuff and get a little distracted by scripted assets, right? Like different prefabs and things. I don't mind so much if you're just grabbing images. In this case, you know, maybe some 3D models would be okay if you just want to have background objects and things. But I wanted the racetrack itself to be a higher priority. One thing we didn't get to that I wanted to do was to have a lap timer where we could actually like race and have a bit of a score attached to the race, right? In terms of how fast did you make it around the track. The only thing is that it's much like the main menu, right? Where when you're dealing with UI elements, you have to have the scripts running, you have to have the UI objects, and then you also have to have like the trifecta of the game, you know, the scene stuff running and hooked up in the right order. We didn't quite get that fast, so we had to skip it. But if you do want to add some more race type functionality to your racetrack, there's a really nice YouTube tutorial by this guy called Jimmy Vegas. If you look for his race game tutorial, he'll show you how to do like a little lap timer up in the corner. So it'll like, as soon as you go through the what's the checkered flag kind of area, right? That's a trigger. It'll start the count, and then you go around to the halfway point in the track. It registers that you're actually going around the track, that you're not just reversing in and out of the main collider, right? So there's one collider that checks that you've gone halfway around, and then it times you as you cross the finish line, right? How long that that lap took you, right? And then it actually records it as like, this is your best time. This is like the current lap time. Our tracks, how many laps should we do? Yeah, just one lap is fine, just so I can see that you put something together. This project is not so much about like how great your track is or, you know, how pretty it is, that kind of stuff. I want you to just go through the whole process of making something from scratch, getting it to work, exporting it as a build, capturing it, right? That whole process is the goal for this project. It's not so much the project itself. It's like, let's get all of those annoying like procedural things out of the way, right? So we know the entire process of making a 3D game, what kind of stuff is going to go wrong, so that then when we're making our own game, we know how to solve these bugs because we've already like done it before. Yeah. So another one of the functionality things that I wanted to have in here was a pause menu. Let me make sure that I strike that from the VLE requirement for people who are watching this carefully. So don't get too distracted. Let me see. Oh wait, that's the pause game for coursework 2, I think. Yeah. Okay, so that one was fine. Pause menu pinged on here. to reply to right now. All right, so let me look at my scripts folder and see if we can pull out this pause menu script, because this is a nice easy win. And it's also good for, again, when you submit like an actual exe to a company or something like that, you want to be able to, you want them to be able to get in and out of your game without Alt F4ing, right? You don't want to like expect them to be too much of a PC user, right? That they're going to know how to quit an application using a keyboard shortcut. You want to have a menu in there so that you don't annoy people. All right, so I've got a little pause menu here, the script that I've used in the past. Let me take a look at where it sits so that we can see how complex it needs to be. All right, so let's walk through what's going on in here. So this will be my pause menu. All right, again, we need to use Unity scene management in here. We're going to have two public game objects, and I believe for these, I didn't actually just use the canvas, but I used panels, which are kind of a sub-object from a canvas. This one, I actually don't need the options menu, so let's comment that out. What it does, right, is it sits under void update. So this is checking every frame. Is anything in here happening, right? In this case, I'm listening for is escape pressed, right? Is anybody hitting escape on the keyboard? So it's checking every 1/30th of a second. Is the escape key being pressed? Then we have a Boolean here that tells the script, is the game already paused, right? Has escape already been pressed? Because you don't want it so that you're hitting it twice and it just keeps pausing the game, right? You want to have it so that if you hit escape again, it's going to resume gameplay, right? So I could have these little sections within the if statement, but I have moved them out into their own functions, right? So this is just some cleanup that is optional, really. You don't necessarily have to do it this way where, but let's walk through it line by line so that we can see. Okay, so if escape is being pressed, right, this if statement, if it is, it goes into these brackets. It's then going to check, is the game paused? So we start out with the game is paused being false, right? When I hit play, the game is running, it's not paused. So, but if it is paused, right, then resume the game, right? So if escape is pressed while the game is already paused, resume. Otherwise, do pause it, right? So when it is paused, we pop up a menu, right? Pause menu, this game object up here. Whatever I put into the Unity editor, right, is going to be that object. So I'm going to be dragging a UI object into that slot. So that way, that menu is hidden, right? The pause menu is hidden when the game is playing. As soon as I hit escape, boom, it enables that game object and it pops up. Then we have the actual pausing here. This is where it freezes time in the game world. Yeah, time.timescale is equal to 0f. Right? And then we set this Boolean variable to say, yes, the game is paused, right? That's just for our internal script here so that we know up here, if the game is paused and I hit escape, it means I want to go back to the game, right? So if we want to go back to the game, it's going to disable that menu, right? It's going to hide the pause menu. It's also hiding this second menu, which I'll take out. That's just if we had the pause menu. And it sets the time, the game world time back to 1, which lets it run as normal. This might be worth something to play with, right? And I think this is what something like Superhot uses in order to do its bullet time, right? So you can set time.timescale to be like an active variable in your scene. And if you haven't played Superhot before, it's really brilliant. It ties the time scale of the world to the player's movement. And if you're in VR, it's especially cool because you can do these like, you can start to move in slow motion and do like some gun fu, right? And if you stop moving like Squid Game, right, you freeze, that means that time.timescale goes down to 0 and the game is effectively paused. And as soon as you make any sort of movement in VR, right, it's tracking your head placement and your arm placement. Anytime the player object moves slightly, that increases the time scale relative to how fast you're moving, right? So if you go like, then it's going to go all the way up to 1.0, right? But if you are matrix bullet dodging and you're going really slow, right? It slows down the time scale so that like these bullets come across the screen and you can actually like watch the bullet go by, even though it would be moving at, 100 miles an hour if we didn't have that. So it is something to consider, right? Is that we have access to the speed of the game inside of Unity. It's a fun one to mess around with, possibly. All right, so let's hook this up the way that I would do this, right? And I might just post this script, but you can find this on YouTube, right? There's plenty of tutorials out there that will show you how to do this. But let's just set it up with the things that we're going to need it to run on. So much like the main menu system that we made, right? We can just have it running on an empty game object here. I believe because it is checking inside of void update, right? That means that if this game object is in my scene, it's checking that game object to see what's going on. Now, like I mentioned, I have this public game object at the top here that I need to set it of what is the menu itself that I'm showing or hiding, right? So since I already have a canvas object that I'm displaying some stuff on, right? I have my mile per hour readout down here, and you guys will have like the rear view camera, right, at the top. If you did that, I've got my speedometer, right? So if I have a canvas object, I like to use these things called panels, which is just a box inside of your canvas, right? That does like a little overlay effect, right? So this is just going to be the object that I hide and show, and then I'll put some text in there, UI text. And I can just say, scale it up. So all it's going to do is pop up this menu when the game is paused. Yeah. This is the game object that I wanted to show and hide. So I go back to my object with the script on it. I tell it, okay, this is the panel that you're going to display when escape is pressed. I think that might be all I need to set, right? Let's see if it works. Oh, the last thing to remember is we don't want this panel showing at the start. So I'm going to disable the game object by default, right? So I hit play. It doesn't show up when I initially hit play. And since I hit escape, it's now set the game time, right, time scale to 0. It is activated this overlay menu, and it's set the variable inside of this script so that it knows to stay within the pause function, right? That way, when I hit escape again, it runs the resume function. Ooh, and I messed with my camera settings, so it's really hard to play. you can kind of see, hopefully, that this little if statement is just determining, is that menu popped up and time is paused, or is the menu being hidden and time is running like normal? And again, these functions here, the pause and resume functions, aren't necessary if you're just getting started coding, right? That kind of stuff can be intimidating. You don't need to have these extra functions. You can just slap all of this code inside. Oh, which one is which though? So this is the pause code, right? So all that code can just be inside of this if statement. And all of that code can be inside this statement. And I don't even need these functions, right? But as you start to clean up your code, right, and get a little more handle on it, then you can start to be like, well, all I need to do here, right, I need to do all these things, but I don't like having these big old long if statements. That's when you start to move snippets of code out of kind of your main void update, right? And just turn it into a like run this pause function, right? Or if game is paused, then run the resume function. Otherwise, and then all of that code that was in there goes into this resume function, right? And just like here, all this code, I would cut it out, right? I would put it down into its own function, and then I would tell it run that function. And it doesn't have to be a public here because it's only within this script, right? So it's gonna look here. If it, if it executes this, it'll jump over to the next line. So this is just a pointer into this function. This is just pointing it to run this little this piece of code next. Yeah. And again, if you're feeling rough around the code, right? If it feels like hell on earth when you dive into this code stuff, it's just practice. It really is just looking at stuff and getting a feel for reading it. I'm not a coder. I won't say that I flunked out of code, but I definitely struggled a lot with C and C++. Once I got into C#, everything is a lot more readable, right? And it is slower. If you're a hardcore coder, you do want to know C++ and things because you can manage your memory, which is important for games. But Unity is nice because it does a lot of that memory management in the background. It lets us play in the simpler coding playground of C#, right? Which is a lot more readable. Any other questions in the chat or anything else that I need to go over? Animated obstacles, I said I would go over. Any questions about pause menu? How to accomplish this one? Let's see if I might have deleted something down here. I did my cut paste. So I think I'm missing a curly bracket. Nothing in chat. Okay, so what I don't want to save. Hopefully it's going to be all right with that. So again, the only tricky or thing to remember with that part is to disable the pause menu, before you start the game. But that'll be obvious once you're in game and you're driving around with a giant pause menu in front of your face, right? Again, remember you can do cool stuff with the canvas by changing it from screen space into world space. If you want to have it so that like the menu pops up on top of the car and it's like a little neon sign and the lighting maybe affects the car or something like that, right? Like if it's in the world space, it should be able to do some of those cool 3D effects. Whereas a screen space is just going to be another layer, like a pane of glass in front of the camera. So let's say that we want to have, maybe we can be devious and have like a rotating rotating jump, so that sometimes it makes it like tough to hit the jump, right? This is kind of mean for an obstacle, but let's try it out. Or let's just do a plain old thwomp, because that's one that's easy to understand what's going on. So I'll make a cube in my scene. This will be my thwomp. Give it a name. Thwomp. Material. Dark gray. So if I want this to be an obstacle that like, moves around in my scene, thwomp, it just goes up and down. I just need to open up the animation window. So window, animation, right? When I have an object selected, it will ask right off the bat, like, do you want to animate this? I hit create. It'll ask where I want to save that animation, right? If you have a lot of animation, typically you want to make an animation folder. If you only have a few, you can just drop it into assets. It's up to you. And we'll see it with Thwomp drop. So the reason I like animating in Unity is because of this record button. Once I hit record, it is awaiting some sort of change on this object. Any sort of change that I make to it, say even if I change like the scale, right, that's going to keyframe that aspect, right? So just for demonstration, right, if I do scale it up, immediately it creates a little line there, kind of like the timeline, right, where it's like, okay, we're animating the scale, I'm ready for scale input, right? So that way, anything that I do with scale along this bar, it will create a keyframe for it, right? You can see these keyframes of the little diamonds getting made here. If I don't want to do anything with scale, right, I can just delete that line and leave it blank. So instead, we want to be able to move this thing. That's going to be our obstacle. So Thwomp just crushes down onto the track, right, and then it lifts back up to its original position. So whenever you're making a looping animation, you want to copy this first keyframe, right? So you drag a box around it, Control C, and then drop the copied version onto timeline. Then I can preview it. But right now it does kind of the opposite speed that it currently does in Mario, right? In Mario, it kind of raises up slowly and then it goes down fast. That means I need to have my drop closer to the beginning, and then it's this area here is where it's raising up. So there I can see the speed. Obviously, I'm never going to make it under that thing, so I need to scroll down when I'm in this animation timeline in order to reveal a longer time frame, and I can start to move things over and guesstimate, right, like what's going to be a good feeling amount of time. Still want it to drop a bit faster, right? It should be a little bit scary when it drops. Boom. So if it drops like a hammer like that, that's what I want. It's got an animation on it. If I'm happy with that object, right, and I want to have 20 of them in the scene, I can just drag that from the hierarchy into my assets folder, and then I can place these all around the map if I want to, right? I do need to think about the offset though, so maybe I should have started it in the down position, right? Because now I'm gonna have to see how high this one is. This one is on the Y about 8. Some questions. How do you quit to main menu and just add a little button? Yeah, you could totally do that in the pause menu. And that's one of the nice things about having that main menu code and why I wanted to give it to you right away. is because once you have a working button or a working piece of code, right, you can use it in other places. So yes, I could totally just like have a button in my pause menu, right? On the panel here, if I enable the panel again, and I make a button, UI object button, right? I can say return to start menu or something like that for my button. And then on click, we would drag our main menu object. I don't have my main menu set up in here, I don't think. Do I make it in this scene? Save this as so that I don't lose it. Oh. So if I have my main menu working over here, let's go. I could just make a new object, right? But underneath my canvas. So I should be able to just copy this object from one scene and drop it into the next. Let's see if it works. So here, that canvas, panel, paste. Oh, that's just the object itself. All right, so now I have the panel and the button. Now I can tell it access the main menu, and in the main menu, go back to, or load the pause menu scene, right? Which is not, I think, in my main menu text for some reason. I didn't put a quit to main menu button in there. But this one will load whatever this play level 1 function tells it to do, yeah? Yeah, good point. So to do curves on animation, this is where animators are made and broken. We swap from what's called the dope sheet to the curves view, or sometimes the graph view. If you want to zoom in vertically so that you can actually see the curves, right? You just want to select those keyframes where the curves are. Hit F, just like you would in game to focus, right? And here you can start to see the actual curvature of that motion, right? So here, the thwomp is starting from about 8, and then it is falling kind of slowly at first, and then slowly as it comes out. So if we want to change the feel of that animation, the ease in and ease out, then we can start to mess around with here in the graph editor, right? By grabbing these little arms and changing the shape of that animation. So if I want it to be like a really scary, just maximum speed drop, right? I might want to like not have such a soft curve when it starts to drop. Or on the other hand, maybe I want to warn the player for a split second, like, oh, it's about to drop, right? Maybe I want it to even like raise up ever so slightly, like it's anticipating and then dropping. I can set those, right? And I can just make additional keyframes here if I want to, mess around with the record. So in this one, it goes up ever so slightly, and then it's going to drop quite steeply, right? You see that roller coaster drop. It's going to be very steep. The one that I showed you in the lab PowerPoint shows you how to set it to linear so that your curve will always say spin in that case at a constant rate. It won't like spin and then wait and then spin and then wait. It'll keep kind of turning at a very constant speed. Yeah, so this is all within the graph editor that you change these things. And when you were doing character animation next semester, for those of you that are interested in this stuff, right, animators spend a lot of time in these curve editors to kind of get the feel, right, the timing of things just right. So our profession is is heavily based around like us having this internal sense of timing, right? Like what's the best time to reveal something, or for a character to turn around, or the order in which to do things with overlaps and things. But that can give you some fun obstacles. Now, I noticed that the other ones disappeared. Now I feel like they're probably on top of this original Thwomp. What do I do with them? Let's see what happens when I actually get it. Ooh, oh, that's pretty effective. Oh, oh, painful. Okay, so it does kind of write itself. Maybe that's just because my settings are so hardcore. Another thing I could possibly do in my pause menu, right, is to have a restart level button. And then again, I could just hook that button up to whichever function that I want to occur on click. So I would say, okay, I'm in, say I'm in level number 3. I'll just set that button to play level 3 again, and then it will reload that scene and let me start fresh, right? Let me start over again, and it'll reset all of the different objects in the scene. Let's see why these thwomps. I think I know why, and it's usually the thwomp 1, thwomp 2. It's usually because if I have just one animation in the scene, it's going to be tied to a certain place in space. So whenever it's in play mode, I believe that these guys, Thwomp 1 and yeah, they're all overlaying on top of the same area. The way that I've gone around this in the past is just to have multiple different animations, right? I could just duplicate the animation, go to that object, and change that animation that it's doing. Oh, I need to go to the controller. Get the state machine. Here's the animation itself, right? I feel like there's an easier way to do this, though. It might be unpacking. Maybe if I unpack the prefab. See if it stays over there. Oh, it still wants to snap back. But it is a problem with if they're all using the same animation file and the same animation controller, right? So this is the same reason why when we had 2 characters yesterday with idle animations, right? We didn't just like make one idle animation, have them both, because then they would be like bouncing up and down at the same speed, and it looks a bit goofy, it looks a bit gamey. I will need to test why it likes to do that, right? It might be that we need to get in there and edit this. Oh, you know what it is? It's because when I keyframe the position of the object, it's also keyframed the X and the Z position, the Z position of that object. So maybe if I go to the original Thwomp drop and I tell it, oh, did I change them all into Thwomp drop 1? Let's just change it back, since that was an unsuccessful test. All right, so now if I open Thwomp drop, I can see there are keyframes on the X and on the Z. If I just delete the X and the Z keyframes so that it's only keyframing the Y, that should work. Let's see if it works in game. No luck. Still coming to the same place. Huh. Do I need to update those other ones as well? It might be a case of having multiple animation controllers. But I have had issues with this in the past. I feel like I need to work through this issue. Let's see if having multiple controllers is what it wants us to have. So on Thwomp number 1, change the animation controller. Still tell it to use Thwomp drop. Still wants to snap them all on top of each other. Yeah, I feel like I need to work on this one. It's got to be a Google solution up there, right? Like, let me see if there's a quick fix, because it's probably going to be easier than trial and error. Playing animation at a local position. Okay, you need to place the animated object inside an empty parent object. The animation will then be positioned in the parent's coordinated space. All right, so let's try that. If we make this under the empty parent object, see if it makes a local difference. Okay, so that does help out. So this one needs to have the same, I say 8.0 starting space. Let's see where it needs to be. So if it has a parent object, it inherits the parent's place in space. Right? So the second one, let's do the same thing. I feel like it needs to be raised up, but the parent. So now it's got a parent object. I'll raise that up to 8. Is that the right way to do it? So I shouldn't raise it up. It should be flush with the ground, which is actually more intuitive. So still snap back somewhere. Why did it snap back? So since they're still using the same animation, right? It's starting at the same place and ending at the same space. That's why they're all going in sequence like that. You could do something in code to delay that, but another way to do it would just be to have multiple different animations so that some of them might have a delay here, right? So the drop part, we could just copy the start frame and change the drop starting point. So let's check Thwomp 1. He's got the new controller on him. Change him to the alternate drop speed. There's also these kind of. All right, so since I have 2 different animations now, one that has a bit of a delay in the curve, right? This one waits a little bit, and then it will play the drop, right? Whereas the first one will just start dropping immediately. So if you want to have things have a bit of a delay on them, you do need multiple animations. So hopefully that'll let you guys use that as a workaround. I can duplicate this now. I'll duplicate you and I move you over here. Snap. Okay, so it does stay if you use the parent game object method, right? But then you need to think about, is it okay that everything plays in the same speed, right? Is that the look that you're going for, or are you trying to get it so that the everything kind of has its own speed that it's going at? Cool. That was just on the Unity forums that I found that question. Any other stuff that you guys want me to look at or do any sharing of previous projects just so you can see what last year's stuff looked like. Car script components. You mean like in the inspector here? You should just be able to go to the standard assets, vehicles, car, and then these prefabs will have all the right components on them, right? If you really mess up and you change something in the prefab, you can also go to the package manager and re-import, I believe, the say the standard assets, and that should overwrite any of these component changes. And I don't think the other trick works, which is just to reset component. That sets it all the way back to the component defaults, not to the, so don't use this one. Prefabs have no script on them. Yeah, that is weird. You must have double clicked on the prefab and then gone in and edited the prefab and done something in here, like removed a component. So yeah, I would just re-import the cars. Cool. Any other questions, guys? Did I get all of, was it Dylan's questions in the chat? The story design ones. Top-down Mac, make this whatever, as long as we model it. Is Dylan still here? Yeah, Dylan. It's not a model, it's just a 2D map. It can be an outline, it can be a drawing, right? It can be a Photoshop, just like here's the throne room, here's the throne, here are two pillars, right? That's a map. It doesn't have to have 3D anything to it, yeah? And you can use some of those online map making tools that were posted way up in the chat if you just search for posts by Mark. Should be in there. Maybe I'll pin those if people are struggling to find them. We need to look at inside. Story design. Somebody else posted a good one too. This is the Valheim one. That's not really useful. It's in there somewhere. Here it is. This one's from Andy, right? The dungeon generator. It's interesting if you want just like a template that you can adjust or change, right? Yeah, your build is what's graded. So make sure your project is not getting too buggy, right? This is also part of the process. It's like, I don't want you to turn in some project with like 37 console errors and be like, I don't know what's happening. You go fix it, right? That's not what I want to do when I'm grading projects, right? That's going to leave a real sour taste. So make sure that you keep your scene stable, make backups, right? Even when you're, this is why, when I transport my scene places, I just right click it and I create these zip files, and then I just let the old ones sit there, right? If I made something on October 13th, like it's got the date on the file name. I know that's when I modified it as well, but like it's good to just have like these stopgaps where you'd be like, the project is working. it's not as complete as I want it, but it is working. Here's a save file or a saved project that works, right? Again, I'm going to keep working on it. A couple of days later, made some big changes. Let's back it up into a zip file. Yeah. And you can use David's method of exporting to package as well. It doesn't grab 100% of your project, and it's a little bit of an algorithm. I am anti-algorithm when it comes to backing up anything. I do not use auto backup. I do not use OneDrive. I click and I drag so that I know for sure that I did it right. Yeah. So it's yeah, errors are okay. It's just the red ones that usually are going to prevent it from building, right? So as long as you can go to file, build and run, or go to your build settings, right? Make sure that you clear this out. If you've dragged a whole lot of scenes in here, you don't need every single scene, right? Just the ones that are working. Right? Just make sure that when you build, you can build, that it doesn't just like boot you out. Test that before the night before, right? Because that's the heart attack moment, is when you hit build the night before it's due and it just stops. You gotta fix red console errors. The nice thing about Unity though, right, even when you do get crazy console errors, copy it, paste it into Google, and usually somebody's got a solution waiting there for you, right? Cool. So let's call it there, guys. Yeah, compile errors. It's no fun. And that's why I did not do well in C++, is because you're writing without a GUI, right? You don't have a game engine running in the background that you're just adding onto. It's like your code is the only thing that exists in that compiler. And if it's wrong, it's like it's not going to tell you anything, right? Because you wrote it. So C++ for me is a no-go. C#, you're building on top of things that are already there, right? You're just like, I want to use scene management, include the scene management. Now I have all these different commands that I can use. Yeah. Yeah, stick them in the questions folder though, right? Not in the class folder, because then they're not going to get as buried. Stuff is going to get buried in those 3D level design and story design channels very quickly. Yeah. So thanks for coming, guys. If you like these, and it looks like enough of you guys have Fridays a little bit free, that I can continue doing these. If you're feeling scared of Unity, you know, that Unity is out to get you, just spend more time, look at tutorials, right? It's just time. You have to just put in the hours, and that's going to get you to where you need to be, because project 2 is a doozy, right? It's a big one. I'm going to try keep it simple, but I will expect you guys to start to be curious, right? And go out there and find things for yourselves and solve problems by yourselves. It's not going to be as spoon-fed as this project was, right? Visual Studio's the enemy. Visual Studio is all right. It's a dumb app, you know. It's just trying to do its job. It's just an engineer trying to get it through the world. Unity can be painful too. Yeah, it's just using it the way that it likes to be used, kind of like Maya. So we try to do it in the right order, but there are just tons and tons of tutorials out there. So start looking for stuff that interests you, right? For the coursework 2, we're going to be using the third-person controller, but not standard assets one, right? Standard assets has these characters in here, and there is a third-person controller. It's kind of like what we're going to be using. This is Ethan, his name is. But the updated one is a little better. Right? It's got a lot more animations attached to it and things. So all it's doing is, let me run it real quick. Where the third person controller. So follow the third person. Look at the third person. So what it's going to depend on, right? What your job is going to be for coursework 2 is to take like the controller, which gets the character running around, right? Change the character model, change the animations. We've done some of that stuff already in Unity. And then design a level, right? But then also, are you going to strap a gun to his back, right? Is he going to be able to leap over a single building, right, in a single bound, right? Or do you want to add like a parkour element or a swimming element, right? Like that's high level stuff. But there's going to be a lot of like trial and error, testing things out. Does my code work? Does it feel right? You know, do my values feel right? So prepare yourself mentally for that, right? This project was the let's get back into Unity, but the racing game is something that I've walked like 12-year-olds through, right? That's the difficulty level of the racing game. This is now getting into university level difficulty for the 3D game project. So it's not all doom and gloom though. It'll be fun. So I'll give you guys some more displays of like what potentially your project can look like. And also remember, just as a note, right, that unlike the racing game where you're pretty much set with your camera angle, right? I didn't actually make it a requirement in the racing game VLE either that your camera has to be behind the car, right? If you want to do like a top-down racing game, like there's nothing really stopping you. All you're doing is changing the position of the camera, right? Same thing with this third-person controller. If you want to have a top-down twin-stick shooter, it works. If you want to have Gears of War over the shoulder, it works, right? If you want to have Diablo isometric view, that works too, right? It's just a different camera angle. None of the controls and inputs and systems there are affected by that. So I don't want you thinking too much in the box, right? But we are going to try and avoid some of the pitfalls that people had last year of designing very difficult to make puzzle games and things, yeah, by making it more action-based. Cool. I'll call it there. Have a great weekend, guys. Have a good afternoon. And I will talk to you soon. And I'll also post this video for people who might want to check it out, but I don't know how useful it'll be, so we'll see. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.